Hi everyone, in today's video I'm going to review my performance at the Southampton Grand Tournament in the United Kingdom. I'll use the lessons I learnt and apply them to those 9th edition rules that have been kindly leaked by Morty and Glory. I've actually got quite a few tournaments booked in over the coming months as my wife is pregnant and our daughter is due to be born in March of next year. So before I become a disciple of Dadhammer, I figure I get in as many games as possible. So the army list I took was organised into a battalion and spearhead detachments with gunnery experts and spotter details. The battalion had a company commander, tank commander with battle cannon, heavy bolter and multi-melters. It's then 5 infantry squads, 2 command squads, a platoon commander, an astropath and a full payload basilisk. The spearhead had 2 tank commanders with flamers, multi-melters and demolisher cannons. It's in a command squad, 2 mortar teams and 3 demolisher limbs and rusters with hull flamers. I start on 3 command points and the list of course leans into inflexible command, boots on the ground and OPSEC limb and rusters. So this 6 game tournament saw me go into Orks twice, Tau twice, Harlequins and Necrons. I went first on 3 occasions and scored an average of 77 points per game, however I disappointingly only won 2. I was bummed that I didn't do better getting another win in, feeling that in at least one of the other losses I probably could have won if I'd made some better choices, of course. So the first game was into Orks with a classic fast attack list with 3 kill rigs and 2 scrap jets. I went second and took the secondaries of inflexible command, boots on the ground and assassinate. I find Orks a good matchup if you can manage their charges and Noir, however their secondary objectives are simply too easy to score, with Stomp 'em good and the biggest and the best being fantastic into Squishy Guardsmen. I lost this game 88 to 95, however I almost nearly tabled my opponent and at the end of it my opponent agreed that if I went first I probably would have won that game. Right next I went into an elite Tau list with a Devilfish, 2 Sun Shark bombers, 3 massive bricks of crisis battlesuits which put out a ridiculous amount of shots, several characters and some Kroots as objective holders. I went second, but my mortars did great work clearing away the Kroots early on, and I consistently obviously scored maximum points on psychic interrogation. I ended up winning this one 93 to 82, with a 2+ save on limb and rusters and armor of contempt probably giving me the game, on account for the fact that the majority of my opponent's shooting was AP -2. I was surprised by this win, but I do think my opponent probably wasn't aggressive enough, feeding out his army piecemeal onto the objectives. Game 3 was into Tau again, but this time a Kroop span list with 145 Kroop Hounds, Carnivores and Crotex Riders, supported by Breacher teams, Pathfinders and broadside suits with heavy rail rifles. To be honest, I didn't enjoy this game, with my opponent choosing to use a chess clock without asking me, and getting a lot of his core rules wrong, something I realised only after the match. I got first turn and tried to pick off the broadsides with rail rifles, but did a disappointingly small amount of damage turn 1. Given the mission and terrain layout had the objective sat in the open, my opponent then flooded the objectives with OPSEC bodies. Looking back, I probably should have managed my OPSEC limb and rusters better, but given they only count as one OPSEC model, it probably would have made little difference. According to my opponent's chess clock, we only got to round 3, but talking to a tournament organiser, we had enough time to play to turn 4. I lost this match 62 to 85, losing out on the primary, but also on lasgun and bayonet, which I foolishly thought could have scored well given how many units he had. Having mapped out the 5th turn, I may have actually won this, given I had wiped out most of his army. And I usually always finish my games with plenty of time, so I know my play time was fine. I think chess clocks are an unnecessary distraction, adding stress into the match, with my opponent being visibly very nervous, stressed and at sometimes snapping, making for a degree of feel-bads on my behalf. So from that I went into Orks and this time got first turn. My opponent took the same secondaries as the first Ork player, with me taking Razor Banners as my 3rd secondary. I pulled the win here, scoring 93 to 81, so near identical to the first game, just the other way around of course. In my experience, going into Orks and getting first turn and having heaps of artillery is a recipe for consistent success. Now the fifth game was into Harlequins, where I went second. This was an unenjoyable experience where my opponent, whom was an absolute gentleman, turn 1 charged my mortar squads with some jet bikes. The mortar squads were sat safely in a building, however they were charged through the roof. I'm usually a master of screening my key units, but now I know that if your opponent has flyers, make sure you also screen from the sky. I spent a lot of the game struggling to deal with his units that were tagging multiple units in my deployment zone, with them able to fall back and charge. My opponent did, however, get one of his stratagems wrong, saying that he could consolidate any of his units after an enemy unit that fell back. This only applies to Harlequin infantry, so the pesky bike squad that at turn 1 charged my mortar squads could have been dealt with quicker. However, ultimately I was simply outplayed by a quality opponent with a top meta army. I lost this one 67 to 97. Right, and lastly, game 6, the last game, was into Necrons. I knew I was in trouble when my opponent let me know that almost all of his army is OPSEC, which included a Silent King and a Satan Nightbringer. I hadn't played into Necrons with a new mission pack and experienced the automatic nature of this secondary scoring. I did go first and plough a boatload of firepower into the Silent King, destroying it turn 2. I even managed to kill off the Satan quite early, despite its 3 wound per phase cap, due to my Astropath rolling a lucky smite on a single D6 smite, and then 3 glorious mortal wounds. I then picked off 3 wounds thanks to las guns, and ploughed in my glorious British Hatred Drill to finish it off with its melee attacks. I did make some mistakes in this game admittedly, not securing one of the objectives nearest my deployment zone, but ultimately the weight of his OPSEC bodies meant I secured a dismal 12 points on the primary to his 36. I did have the moral victory, however, leaving him with only a single model on the board to about 1,000 points to mine. However, I ultimately lost this 59 to 79. Right, so what did I learn from all of that? Firstly, Astra Militarum can still put out a ton of effective firepower. Granted, I didn't go into any armour of content armies. 6 Leman Russes with gunnery experts does fantastic work. Now, from what we know about the new codex, I'd say that our volume of shooting dice rolls is probably going to be reducing. None of the regimental doctrines mention anything about rerolling number of shots, and Leman Russes won't have grinding advance anymore. Granted, a lot of weapons are having weapon profiles modernised, with the Basilisk getting D6 plus 3 shots, but so is the Manticore getting exactly the same profile. Demolishers remain at heavy D6, but now have damage D3 plus 3, whilst the Battle Cannon also gets the heavy D6 plus 3, but with flat 3 damage. So a number of absolute shots will probably be more consistent, and of course the turret weapon rule, allowing us to shoot out of melee, could have seen me happily plough my Leman Russes into the blobs of Kroot Carnivores or Necron Warriors, clog out my opponent's movement while still blasting other high threat targets. Also, for my next tournament at Coventry next weekend, I'll be adding in another 2 infantry squads for a total of 7 squads. I really felt the lack of OPSEC bodies in several games, but the OPSEC Leman Russes did do a bit of work in a few occasions. Again, from what we know about the new doctrines, armoured superiority will make our vehicles count for more than 1 model, which will do a lot of work for any guard list. My Hades Breach and Drill continue to do good work, and I pray they will carry over into the 9th edition book. However, with only a 6-inch move, it is pretty limited. Now, the new Rough Riders have me all excited because they both look fantastic, but also more so what they'll do to our gameplay. A credible fast attack melee unit will really change the way Guard plays, and I think it will take a bit of adapting to get used to. If I think about my army list, I can't actually think what I would drop to make way for them. Maybe a Leman Russ or a couple of infantry squads, I don't know. Ultimately, we need to know what our secondary objectives are going to be before deciding whether any of the new units will be game-changing for us. What makes Orks and Necrons such a challenging opponent is their ease of secondary scoring. As you know, their win rate changed dramatically with chapter approved Nephilim, and in all 3 matches I played into them, I managed to destroy most of their army, but lost out against high scoring secondaries. And keeping on melee, a worry I do have is that Bulgrams are going to remain as terrible as they currently are by the looks of things. If what Morty and Glory says is true, they're definitely going to get tougher, but their weapons are keeping the same profile, whilst Ogryn weapons look to be improving dramatically. If this is the case, my 8 Bulgrams won't be seeing any play for many years to come, which is annoying. Being critical here, this could be a purposeful ploy by GW to encourage everyone to go and buy new model kits to rebuild Ograms. A bit sophisticated, but a similar point of view could be applied to the Rogel Dawn tank. It could simply be so good that you have to buy it, as a Leman Russ becomes pretty pants in comparison. At an apparent 250 points, it looks relatively good value with somewhat superior firepower overall. Of course, we don't know what a Leman Russ will cost in the new codex, but if it does increase, then I'd say that the Rogel Dawn will probably become a requirement in your army list, which will be annoying to anybody playing in the tournament scene, including myself. Another small detail I definitely noticed in this tournament was the complete lack of depth in our tank orders, with me constantly giving the order gunners kill on sight. In comparison, I used nearly all of the infantry orders, including fixed bayonets into the Harlequins and get back into the fight against the Ork lists. The new tank orders will do wonders for our vehicles and what they can do, and it does suggest to a very small degree that vehicle heavy lists could be the way to go. Of course, a number of tank commanders in a list will restrict this, and likewise the number of tank orders they can give as well. But yep, enough of all that. Hopefully interesting to hear how I did relatively poorly at that tournament. I'm a proud Astra Militarum commander, proudly waving the banner high for us guard players, being the sole play at that tournament. Hope that my suffering over the last year or so in tournaments pays off when the new codex comes out, and my win rate is reversed at 4 wins to 2 losses. Here's to hoping. So keep your bayonet sharp, last gun oiled, faith in the Emperor strong, Patron Platoon, sound off. Tank Commander Glenn, Tank Commander Mitchell, Tank Commander Watchdog Van Etten, Colour Sergeant DuPont, Sergeants Udall, Gilliam, the Colonel Merrill, Veterans Gibson, Hall, Lundeen, Guardsman's Beard, Coquelin, Flint, Hills, Malik, Nitton, Nguyen, Smith, Tom, Tompkin, Conscript Bosun, England, Goodwin.